transparency, justice. No one is above the law. Those are things that ought to be true, and something that people and governments all around the world and throughout history, and certainly the United States today, deserve. And oftentimes the people who are in power do everything they can to prevent every one of those things because it benefits them. And there's probably no better example of that right now than this whole fiasco of the Epstein files and all of the things that implies, because allegedly there is a list compiled, and I'm certain that there is one, whether it's a specific one or whether it's something that's just a symbol from other places is irrelevant. There are known people on that list of abusers. There have been women who were victims of this over a long period of time, of the Epstein dark world. And to date, none of them have been held accountable except for the sole man of Jeffrey Epstein and, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell, his principal accomplice. But there are a lot of other people who remain in the dark, and the victims themselves are fed up with all of this. Now, you know that prior to the election last year, many of the Trump supporters and many Republicans were emphatic about saying we need the list released. Everyone who's on the list needs to be exposed. Nobody should be covered over. Nobody should be protected. Anyone who abused underage women should have any kind of protections at all until actually they took office. And then some of those who were the biggest supporters of releasing the list suddenly discovered there is no list, as a matter of fact. And we just want this to go away. And of course, at the head of that list is President Trump. He has been leading the charge to get this suppressed, to get people to distracted from it, to try and squelch it whenever it does hit the headlines. And so far, those efforts have not been successful. And many of the victims were eagerly waiting on what Trump could do to finally bring some transparency and some justice for them. But now then they have reached their limit. And this past Wednesday, there was a press conference in front of the White House, in front of the Capitol, led by a couple of or a number of bipartisan members of the House of Representatives that came out and said, hey, it's time to release all the files, all of them. That's what they're trying to get. And there was a number of the survivors spoke, and this particular one here from Lisa Phillips, I found very persuasive.
Transparency is justice. Release the files, end the secrecy, and stand with us in declaring that no one, no billionaires, no politicians, not world leaders, is above the law. Several of us Epstein survivors have been discussing creating our own list of names. We know the names. Many of us were abused by them. Now, together as survivors, we will confidentially compile the names we all know were regularly in the Epstein world. And it will be done by survivors and for survivors.
I just can't help but just applaud the incredible courage it takes to do something like that for Lisa and all of the other women who came forward publicly. I can only imagine just the trauma, the emotional trauma that had been leveled against them, basically turned into sex slaves against their wishes and abused by powerful men. And I certainly hope that they get exactly what they asked for. You see that they've tried to be patient, but their patience has not been paid off. So now they're taking additional steps. Now, it is really important and noteworthy, specifically what she said there. She said there are billionaires, politicians, and world leaders who need to be held accountable. This is not some minor issue. And I can promise you that this is one case where partisanship doesn't even exist. It doesn't matter anything about whether you're a conservative, a liberal, a independent, no tag at all. The human heart, when you get power, wants to be satiated. And too often they use illegal, unethical, and immoral means to get that done. And so there's people on all across the whole political spectrum. She said world leaders as well. Now, I assure you that every one of those world leaders, past, current, or well, not future, but past or current, is terrified of this coming out. And I frankly worry about these women, because those people and the billionaires that she mentioned are certainly have every incentive and means to try and suppress this. They've been successful so far, no matter what has happened, because there's been a lot of lawsuits and a lot of money being paid to a lot of these victims now that it's come out. But so far, they have been successful in keeping their names out of it. So other than, I think, Prince Philip, I believe it is, from the UK, he's one of the very few that's actually been partially named, though he himself has not come under actually any legal definition or legal action so far. So, but he's one of probably hundreds of people. And she also specified in there the people who routinely came, i.e., this was not a one-off kind of situation, though that by itself, a single time, is worthy of justice and worthy of punishment, because one time is one time too many. But these that they're talking about were routinely in the Epstein world, they said. So those people, I don't care how much money that they have paid, they need to be held to personal account. And folks, if we stay in a world where, and it doesn't matter, the United States, Europe, other countries, who knows, if the rich and elite can continue to do illegal and immoral activities and stay hidden up, and sometimes have to shell out a few dollars here and there out of their extraordinary wealth, which they'll never miss, we're in a world of hurt, because the longer you do things and you get away with them, the more you're going to do them, and the more you're going to exploit the powerless. And that is a horrible situation, which is bad for everybody. It's bad for any community. It's bad for any country. It's bad for humanity. And it's something that we need to all get together on, all regular people who also want justice and transparency. We need to do everything we can to put pressure on the politicians, all of them, so that this continues to be exposed and that we don't get stopped here. I was a little bit disappointed that on that press conference, they didn't release it then instead of just announcing it, because I think that's a bit of a tactical error and a risk, because now then you give those who are on that list additional time to try and squelch it by whatever means. And I don't put anything past these people because they have done a lot to keep it hidden so far. And I just am concerned about the lengths to which some could go to prevent this list from getting out. And I hope it happens very, very soon, like in the next few days would be ideal. One other supporter of this has been Marjorie Taylor Greene, Representative Greene, who, of course, has been a big supporter of President Trump. But even she was out there and she made this comment.
It's a scary thing to name names, but I will tell you, I'm not afraid to name names. And so if they want to give me a list, I will walk in that Capitol on the House floor and I'll say every damn name that abused these women. I can do that for them, and I'd be proud to do it.
And I believe her. As a matter of fact, there's a piece out in the Wall Street Journal today where it's talking about why Marjorie Taylor Greene broke with Trump on Epstein. And you don't have to get very far down into this article, and you kind of see her viewpoint, where she says the truth needs to come out and the government holds the truth. And so she wants to bring whatever pressure she can from the legislative branch to the administrative branch, and to get that list released, to get all the files released, not just a list, because you remember earlier this year, I think it was in February, where Pam Bondi went on Fox News and confidently declared, when asked directly about a list, not any files, not anything else, not something you had to figure out, but a list of the abusers, she said, "It is on my desk. The list is on my desk." And then, of course, she famously backtracked from that and says, "Oh, well, I didn't say it was a list, just that there was a file on my desk that I had to go through. And once I did, come to find out there's no list at all." Isn't that crazy? Yeah, I'm not buying it. And then, of course, you have Kash Patel, the FBI director, Dan Bongino, deputy director, who were both emphatic about releasing the list. And now they claimed also there's no list. Everybody has gone to ground that used to be boisterously saying about this list on the administration, except for Marjorie Taylor Greene. So that's a big issue there. And listen, she is going to have an uphill battle because President Trump does not want to release the list. In fact, I have never seen him spooked on anything, never on anything. He's like water off a duck's back, no matter what has come at him. I'm talking lawsuits, convictions, verbal attacks, lawfare from the Biden administration. I mean, a bunch of stuff. It's just like water off a duck's back, except for this. And he has done everything in his power to obfuscate, to try and distract, and to try and minimize what's going on. And a matter of fact, in a Truth Social, I think it was the day before yesterday, he posted this, and it's kind of a long screed, really. And he just said it's all the Democrat Party's fault. And, they did all this stuff and they were bad and they took his money. But, they don't really want this to come out. He was referring to the Wednesday press conference. They're just doing it now for political reasons. And then he concludes by writing, "This is merely another Democratic hoax. It's not even true, apparently, just like Russia, which is what he says all the time about something that genuinely was a hoax, or at least a large portion of it." And so he's trying to connect that to something in the past so that you see this current one, so his supporters will not believe it and therefore won't put any pressure on him. All the others, in order to deflect and distract from the great success of a Republican president and the record-setting failure of the previous administration and the Democratic Party. The Department of Justice, and here we get to the bottom line, the Department of Justice has done its job. They have given everything requested of them, i.e. all the documents, now everything to be released. So he said, because they've released some things. He claims that's it. There's nothing left. It's time to end the Democratic Epstein hoax and give the Republicans credit for the great, even legendary job that they are doing. It's time to end the Democratic hoax. So he is trying to squelch this again. And he's tried to do this a couple of times before, but so far people have not let it go. Now, listen, I'm not in the least claiming that the Democrats are not motivated, at least many of them, by an attempt to politically embarrass President Trump or to weaken him or so. I'm sure that they are. But if they are, and if there's something in those files to see, then that's a secondary consideration. Whether their motivations are pure or as dark as oil, we deserve to see those files. Because if something bad has been done by billionaires, politicians, and world leaders, we deserve to find out. And we deserve to see it. And those women, hundreds of them who have been victims, deserve justice. That above all. I mean, if you have been the victim of a horrible crime like that, and yet nothing is done to rectify it or justify it, and then society basically condones it, and you never get justice. I mean, that's going to take whatever was by itself a horrible psychological problem and something that's going to be very difficult to overcome, and then compound it. Let's don't compound it. And that showed you Marjorie Taylor Greene there a second ago. Representative Massey also replying and responding to what President Trump put in that Truth Social had this to say.
I think it's shameful that this has been called a hoax. Hopefully today we can clear that up. This is not a hoax. This is real. There are real survivors. There are real victims to this criminal enterprise.
And that's exactly what it is. It was a criminal enterprise. It's something that was international. It was, broadly spread over. It definitely catered to lots of the rich. Of course, there's all kinds of rumors out there that it had to do with the Israeli Mossad, with the U.S. CIA, with MI6 out of UK. Who knows? Maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there's no truth to that. Maybe it's hardcore real. I have no earthly idea, nor does anyone else in the public. And we deserve to know. We need to see all of these files to find out everybody who is involved with this. Because maybe Epstein was doing a lot of this stuff, but there most likely were plenty of enablers. But what we know for a fact is that there is a list. And you saw Lisa Phillips there validate that. There is a list. And if you won't take it out of the files, they'll provide it for you. Now, this is not going to be hearsay. As she specified in that opening soundbite we used, these women who were going to compile the list were abused by them, firsthand knowledge. So it's not hearsay. It's what they actually experienced. And listen, if there's any doubt that this actually exists, and that people in authority know about it. Just consider these few facts here. There's been a number of lawsuits out there. 100 people, mostly victims, have been paid $121 million in one class action lawsuit. A separate 100 victims was paid $150 million. And then there was a huge class action lawsuit against JP Morgan Chase where $290 million was paid out. I promise you, as firmly as I can, none of these wealthy people, especially the bank, which, by the way, was accused of knowing about all this abuse and intentionally doing all these bank transactions with Epstein, knowing what was going on. That's why they had to pay this money. That's why they were brought up on charges. Nobody pays this money unless they know they're guilty and they want to keep it quiet. If they were innocent, if nothing had happened, they're not going to pay that kind of money. Not that kind of money. That's a lot of money being paid here. So you can't have people acknowledging some level of guilt. And I understand all the legal stuff. They didn't legally acknowledge guilt. They just said, no, we would rather not take this to court and all that. I get all that. That's dissembling. That's just cover. And it's thin cover at that. Nobody pays that kind of money unless they know that the last thing they want is to go to trial and have discovery so that everybody sees the evidence. They want to keep it quiet. Well, you don't pay that kind of money unless there are very wealthy, powerful men who do not want their names out there. So there is a list, and people do know who has done some of these things. Probably some of the victims don't even know who some of the people were. If they weren't famous or well known, they may not have known. They just know somebody paid some money to Epstein, and all of a sudden they had to do these dastardly acts. But they know some of them because they were well known. And according to what this Lisa Phillips said here, and some of these other victims at that press conference, they know the names and they're going to compile them. And listen, it's likely that there are probably hundreds of people on here. There are probably, and we're just looking at this country, there are probably Republicans, there are probably Democrats, there are probably well-known business people, and they're going to be humiliated and shamed. And I think that it would probably, it's going to cause some real trauma, I think, in our country when we see the full list of these names. Let it begin. Let that trauma happen because it needs to. It's necessary to get to a situation where we try at least and get some justice for these victims. But also understand, folks, if they don't succeed, and if this list is never brought out, and if these people are never exposed to any kind of justice at all, I mean, legal is great, but and appropriate. But I mean, even just the public shame and humiliation is necessary, because if they succeed, they themselves and others in their class, in their category, will continue to believe they are above the law and that there is no transparency and that there won't be any justice and that power can exploit the powerless. That will continue on, if not expand, if this doesn't see the light of day. It's a much bigger deal, I think, than it appears to be. It's not just a salacious issue that would be interesting to read for people, et cetera, make a bunch of headlines. This is something that we need as a corrective to a bad direction that our country is going writ large across any political boundaries, across any strata. It's just these wealthy elite, this super wealthy elite that is dominating so many things in our politics, in our business world, you name it. I mean, they're on top of everything, and there's got to be some accountability, folks. It's beyond time for that. This is a great place to start. We'll see. We'll continue to bring you any information that happens as this continues on. One other thing I do want to talk about, because it happened yesterday after our last show. We talked about this once before because we knew it was coming. But President Trump, after our last show yesterday, did finally make official his addition of the term Department of War in lieu of the Department of Defense. Now, just some legality technicalities. It takes an act of Congress to rename that, because it took an act of Congress to name it the Department of Defense. And so President Trump can't unilaterally officially change it, but he can apparently, through executive order, add the name. And so that's what he's done. He said he's going to think about going to Congress. He'll do that, of course, if he has the numbers, because then that would make it permanent, as opposed to this, which can be undone by any future president. because it was an executive order and it can be undone with an executive order. I doubt he's all that concerned about that. He's primarily concerned about what it is in his own tenure here. But this is also a bigger deal than it admits. As we say a lot, words are important, and you're going to hear Secretary of now War Hegseth say that in just a minute. But as we add, and he didn't, it matters what the words say in comparison with actions, and the actions override the words if they're not in alignment. If the words and actions are in alignment, terrific, that's great. If they're not, we go with the actions here. Let's take a look, first of all, at the signing ceremony when President Trump signed the executive order. He gave the floor first to the new Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
After winning a war for independence in 1789, George Washington established the War Department, and Henry Knox was his first Secretary of War. And this country won every major war after that, to include World War I and World War II. Total victory, Mr. President, as you said. Then 150 years after that, we changed the name after World War II from the Department of War to the Department of Defense in 1947. And as you pointed out, Mr. President, we haven't won a major war since, and that's not to disparage our warfighters, whether it's the Korean War, or the Vietnam War, or our generation of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's to recognize that this name change is not just about renaming, it's about restoring. Words matter. It's restoring, as you've guided us to, Mr. President, restoring the warrior ethos, restoring victory and clarity as an end state, restoring intentionality to the use of force. So at your direction, Mr. President, the War Department is going to fight decisively, not endless conflicts. It's going to fight to win, not to lose. We're going to go on offense, not just on defense. Maximum lethality, not tepid legality. Violent effect, not politically correct. We're going to raise up warriors, not just defenders.
So, of course, the first thing he does, he's got to trot out George Washington. A favorite thing of some people, I do that a lot. I brought out Thomas Jefferson, I think, just in yesterday's show. And you see they were right away changing the name plates on the door and a bunch of other places, too. They didn't waste any time at all in getting that done. But let's just take a look at some of the things he said there, because they really are important. Words do matter, and sometimes they matter in ways you don't think that they're going to matter. Especially when the words and actions are incongruent. First of all, he points out by saying, hey, George Washington named it the Department of War, and it stayed that way all the way through World War II, and we had won every war up to that point, implying that the name Department of War translates into actual action on the ground, and that's why we won those wars, because we had the Department of War, and so we won the war. Well, you kind of got to look at the context of World Wars I and II that he mentions, because it was a global conflict, and we had a huge help, and we were part of, even better way to put it, an alliance system. So World War I, of course, we came late into that conflict. And there was already the Allies, the French and the British and a number of others. The Germans had been fighting for a long time on the Western Front. And then we came in late. We were only fighting for, I want to say, like 6 months of actual combat on the ground. And we took a pretty heavy toll, about 100,000 killed in action or died of other means during that war. But that was a pretty short amount of time to have that go on there. So we were kind of the decisive part. After the Germans had been bled dry, and then you had the French and the British who also suffered millions of casualties, and then we came in. We were able to provide decisive action, and of course our economic advantages, our industrial capacity, the things that we could produce, etc. All of that proved decisive to help tip the balance. That had nothing to do with the name Department of War. At that time, it was pretty common. It was all over the place. I want to say that the British were also the Department Ministry of War, I think, at that time. They apparently changed it before World War II, and so that didn't seem to have much effect one way or the other for British on World Wars I or II. Everything depended on how the battle was actually fought. World War II is even more. We were, again, late to get into that one. And again, we were fighting with an alliance system primarily on the Eastern Front, and of course in the Pacific, also was part of an alliance system. And the Soviet Union, we kind of downplay that, if not outright forget it right now. The Soviet Union was our ally during the Second World War, and they absorbed massive numbers of casualties on the Eastern Front, and inflicted massive numbers of casualties. I want to say over 70-something%, maybe even been higher than that, but it was at least 70% of all the German casualties were caused by the Soviet Union and the Red Army, not by us. We were fighting on a comparatively smaller front in the Western Front, while the Soviets did the damage on the Eastern Front. Simultaneously, obviously, it ended up with the destruction of the Nazi Germany Empire. And in the Pacific, the same kind of situation. China was our ally, and they suffered quite a number of casualties, in the millions as well. And they fought Japan long before we did. I think it was 1930, if I'm not mistaken, is when the Japanese and Chinese started fighting. We didn't enter the war until, of course, 1942 for all intents and purposes, when we went into North Africa for the first time. But there was a big allied fight that went on there. And so to say, even imply, and he did, that we won that because we were called the Department of War. But since that time, he says, now then, we haven't won any time since then. And, he goes on to talk about Vietnam and Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, and several others, and said, we didn't win any of those. Okay. Whether we won or lost or just didn't finish any of those conflicts has everything to do with the conditions at the time and the decisions that we've made politically, and absolutely nothing to do with the name of the department on your nameplate on the door in the Pentagon. No relation, no correlation whatsoever. We didn't win the Vietnam War because it's a war we should never have fought. As many people don't even realize, we almost didn't fight the Vietnam War because John F. Kennedy, when there was only a small number of advisors, I think 1,000 or 2,000, really small, just advisors, he said, this is not going anywhere. And he signed an executive order that said, all right, I want to withdraw all of these guys. This is a losing proposition. Let's get out of it. And as you may know, he was then assassinated, I want to say like a month later, a very short period of time later, and LBJ rescinded that executive order and increased the number. And then, of course, we get sucked into it, and we had 500,000 troops there fighting a war that should never have been fought and could never have been won, that we shouldn't have been involved in the first place. Has nothing to do with the name on the door. McNamara, whether he was called Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense, had nothing to do with anything. It had everything to do with the policies. And you can say the same thing with the disaster of Afghanistan, etc. All of that has to do with actions. And to keep thinking that, no, we're just going to use a marketing slang here and change, that'll change it, that'll make something good, is troubling, because I wonder if some of these people actually believe it. Trump is all about marketing. I mean, he's got his name on everything, buildings, stakes, schools, you name it. He loves to put his name on everything, and he put his touch on the White House with gold everywhere. You've seen a lot of those pictures in the Oval Office, etc. That's just his thing. He's all about branding, and so now he thinks it's cool, I guess, to change the name here, and that's going to somehow make a mental difference. It's not going to make a bit of difference, at least not in a positive direction. It could actually have something. It could have a negative reaction, which I'm going to get to in just a second. But a couple of other things that Hegseth said there. He said that, we're going to, this is not about just changing name. It's about restoring, he said. We're going to restore the warrior ethos. Okay, that's what you said when you came into office. I mean, literally what you said on the first day you were in office, and you made a big video about it. And you repeated it ad nauseum in the beginning, that you were going to bring that warrior ethos back. I actually applauded that when he was confirmed, and during his confirmation testimony. That's what he said he wanted to do. And I said, that's good. We need to have the warrior ethos in the Department of Defense, in our armed forces. They need to have that, as opposed to just trying to be peacemakers or peacekeepers or whatever, doing counterinsurgencies or whatever. That's not what we need to keep our country safe, so that we can defend ourselves from any external attack, because that's what the reason we had a Department of Defense was, to defend our country against attack and to be able to win decisively if we were attacked. That's always been the mission. It's always been stated overtly. So changing the name of the department has nothing to do with the mission. That still is the condition as it was before. But they're claiming that, well, now we're going to win decisively. We're no longer going to use, and I think the phrase he used was, we're going to not lose. That's as though Everybody from Vietnam up to yesterday were trying to not lose. Like that's all we ever want to do. That's absurd. I mean, that's self-evidently untrue. All you got to do is look at all these statements from all these generals all the way through. I mean, go back to that famous Westmoreland speech at a joint session of Congress, where all he did is talk about we're taking it to the enemy, we're going to win, and we're going to defeat them, and all this stuff. Nixon said this, or not Nixon. LBJ said the same thing all the time. We're going to win this war, etc. You can go into. I mean, you can even go further back into the Korean War. Where the president said, yep, we're going to win this war. We're going to, this police action, whatever, we're going to succeed. And then, of course, the Chinese enter, and then it turns into a stalemate, and we have to get out of it or risk nuclear escalation, et cetera. That wouldn't have helped any time in that point. It wasn't because of the name on the door. And then in Afghanistan, and we talked all the time about winning. In fact, one of the things I did in 2012 was expose the lies of all of our politicians and our many generals who every single year kept saying, we're winning, we're moving in the right direction. General Allen, I think in 2013, most famously said, this is winning. This is what winning looks like. So don't now tell me that all we did in the past was not to lose, because that was never the case. Who would ever in their right mind actually employ the United States military to not lose? Because we would send them in there. We would proactively send them in there. And this other issue that we keep saying, that the administration says that, I don't want to be the Department of Defense. I want to also be the Department of Offense. Can anyone try and claim that we haven't been incredibly offensive? I mean, let's look way back in history to earlier this summer when we had an unprovoked attack against Iran to destroy or at least damage their nuclear capacity in their country. We weren't attacked. We weren't threatened with attack. And yet we went in and attacked another country. And you want to say that wasn't offensive? And you talk about not losing? That's the perfect example of exactly what we did. And that's not because of the name on the building. That's because of the actions and decisions of the people in charge. They should never have started that mission against the Houthis, especially. Let's look at that one, because that's one where I think I showed you yesterday, even Secretary then of Defense Hegseth emphatically pounded his fist and said, we will be relentless. We will continue to do this until the Houthis are either quelled or they have stopped attacking in the Red Sea. And then 2 months later, when we realized, oh, snap, we're not going to. The Houthis have been absorbing this kind of punishment for a decade, and they've never succumbed. And it became self-evident they were not going to. And because of the weapons we were already, and ammunition with interceptor missiles, primarily we were given to Israel and into Ukraine, we didn't have enough to continue this open-ended, just continue bleeding out in the Red Sea, because it already spent $1 billion in like 2 months, and we have a very limited number of interceptor missiles. So we rightly said, all right, we're going to shut this deal down. And so that's exactly what we did. And the Houthis continue, just recently as 2 days ago, to continue to try and interdict and attack shipping in the Red Sea. They just don't hit our stuff. So that was kind of the deal that we made with them. But that's because of the decisions, the foolish decision to get in, and then the embarrassing decision to get out and try to just say, all right, we made a deal with the Houthis came begging for us to have this ceasefire, whatever. Put whatever name you want on it. Those are the same people in charge now. And so saying that we weren't successful then because the name on the door, and now suddenly we've changed the nameplate and there's going to be a different outcome when the same people are in charge. I mean, you know what they say about insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Kind of seems to apply here. Well, that's what Secretary of War Hegseth said. Let's take a look at how the president, how he characterized this.
Really, it has to do with winning. We should have won every war. We could have won every war, but we really chose to be very politically correct or wokey, and we just fight forever. And then we, win. We wouldn't lose, really. We just fight to sort of tie. We never wanted to win wars that every one of them we would have won easily with just a couple of little changes.
See, that worries me. His comments there worry me more than anything that Secretary Hegseth said. I mean, he's just the head of the department. I mean, it's kind of important, but he's not the decision maker about what gets it, about whether we go to war or not. He's only the executor. Once the president of the United States gives it an order, he executes it, but he himself does not decide whether we're going to fight or not. The president, on the other hand, is the commander in chief. And of course, as the Constitution and the 1973 war powers specifically claim, the chief executive does not have the authority to take our country to war. Only Congress does that. It either has to be expressly ordained, or there has to be a declaration of war, or our forces have to have been attacked or are under imminent attack. Only on those cases can the president use lethal military power. But of course, unfortunately, as we've talked about too many times, over a number of administrations, and you could probably go all the way back to the LBJ administration and all the way through every president since, certainly going back to George Bush, the first George Bush. All these guys, George Bush 41, all these guys have violated the Constitution and used military power, but they've done it kind of small, and it hasn't launched into anything big. Even George Bush's 2003 war in Iraq, at least he did get the cover of getting the authorization for the use of military force, the AUMF, for that. It was a bad decision by the Congress, but at least in that regard, he followed the law. But in so many other ways, he didn't. Obama didn't in a ton of ways. Trump in his first term didn't. Biden didn't. And now here he's going again. We've already continued to use them. And now then it's become normalized. No one bats an eye anymore. So it's already in a dangerous place to where the U.S. military is now basically the plaything of the chief executive, whether it's Trump the rest of this term or anyone that might follow him. And when you hear President Trump saying, oh, the war would be easy, all we had to do was make a few changes here and there, and we'd have won all these wars. Okay, first of all, I remind you, despite the name on the nameplate on the door, he had a first administration, and the wars weren't easy. And he never ended the Afghanistan war. He never won it. He never left it. He didn't get the troops out of Syria, which he also inherited from the Obama administration. And they were there when he came in. They were there when he left. So he didn't get that solved. So he has some direct experience with that. And yet now he's talking like it's an easy thing. When you think that war is easy, and that with just a little bit of changes here, we would win everything. And now then you have expressly said that you authorized this change because you don't want to just be on the defense. You want to go on the offense, which is saying something, because that's almost all we've done is go on the offense for decades here. Really, you can say 9/11 plausibly was a defensive reaction and a response to what happened. But just about everything else has all been offensive already without the name change here. But when he says he wants that to go on the offense and that he wants to win these wars and that they would be easy, it makes me really nervous about what may come next. Because if you actually believe that, and of course, if you're surrounded by all these people who back you up and say, yes, Mr. President, you're right, whatever it is you said or whatever you're about to say, yes, sir, that's correct. That's a dangerous situation because we've already lost the withdrawal or the ability of the Constitution to restrain war. Recall that war is supposed to be hard to get into because it is very difficult to get out of. Our founders recognized that. That's why they made the separation of powers between the legislative and the executive branches so that it would be hard to get into a war. And only if you had the support of the people enough to get Congress to do that and authorize it would you then get into a war. And then you had the people behind you at the least. Now then we've eliminated that. That's been lost. Doesn't matter Republican, Democrat. There is no more balance of power in the U.S. government. It is now the plaything of the President of the United States. All he's got to do is make a declaration and then give the order. The Secretary of Defense will say, yes, sir, and execute. It's as simple as that. That's where we are right now. And if you think that it's easy, then you may be tempted to say, okay, look, all we got to do is do this. Give me a good plan. Is this something we can do? If the guy tells you yes, President Trump has no idea. I mean, he's a guy who does businesses. He knows land and real estate. He's good at that. He knows that world inside out. Apparently, he knows grass really good from his golf courses, he said recently. Things about war, Not so much. As a matter of fact, he knows hardly anything in there. Not a ding on him. That's just not anything he's paid, studied over his time. He just give a few orders, like the assassination of Soleimani, or the attack into Syria that he did during his first term, etc. The situation with ISIS, all those kinds of things. He knows how to give orders, and so far they've been kept on a small scale. But now then, I'm concerned, and let's look at one of the reasons why. Is this whole issue in the Caribbean Sea. Now, he has just raised here recently, a lot of issues about Venezuela. And now then there are 8 ships, naval assets in the Caribbean region. Some of them are Coast Guard cutters, but a bunch of them are missile boats. And one of those, the USS Iwo Jima, is a Marine and expeditionary unit. So a group of, I believe it's around 2,000 Marines that can do beach landings. And one wonders, why are they in there? Well, more than that. And of course, Trump has continued. They put a $50 million bounty on the head of Venezuela, Maduro. They said he is an indicted drug lord in the United States. And so he needs to be brought to justice, etc. They said, his election was illegal. He's not the legitimate president of their country, according to what we say. And then now we see this deployment of military power around there. We just blew up, allegedly, a drug boat here a couple of days ago, earlier this week, on September the 2nd. And then now here we find out that on Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean basin there, you have this Marine, I believe it's the 22nd Marine Amphibious, or 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, is doing beach landing practice in Puerto Rico. Now, you might think, well, I mean, that's what Marines do. They're supposed to practice. Well, just to point out, they have not done this. The 22nd Marine has not practiced in Puerto Rico since 2003. So this is the first time it actually started in August, I believe, and now is continuing on. And these forces are connected with the USS Iwo Jima, which is part of this group here. Is somebody thinking about doing something with these guys in Venezuela? I mean, this could just be all for show. It could just be a saber rattling and gunboat diplomacy, etc. I hope that's all it is. And I hope that nobody thinks that war is easy and that just a handful of Marines and a bunch of boats in the ocean that could, rain down a lot of missiles on a certain target, that you can use that and somehow get some kind of a good thing. President Trump was asked, I believe, just yesterday in the Oval Office, do you want regime change in Venezuela? And at least at the time, he said, I don't know anything about that. He was kind of vague. He didn't embrace it, but he said, that's not what we're looking for, or something. But he didn't, outright deny it. But when you see all the actions that were taken, again, getting back to that words and action dichotomy, if your words are one thing, but then the actions are you send combat power here, you have used lethal military power on this boat in the Caribbean Ocean, and you're practicing your Marines landing not far from where they might be used against Venezuela, one has to wonder, WTH, what's going on? What is the purpose of this? If it's just gunboat diplomacy, what is it supposed to compel the Venezuelans to do? I mean, already Venezuela is used as a conduit on both the ground, air, and sea by drug cartels, which are not controlled by the government. Now, there's lots of corruption in the government, like a lot, no question about that. And that goes throughout. I mean, you're talking Mexico all the way down to Latin, Central, and South America, et cetera. A lot of that stuff, that's pervasive in there. Drugs come from any number of places, probably more from Colombia than any other country. And a lot of that does go through Venezuela. But if you're trying to just get Venezuela to do something, you have no leverage over them. And to just use these military assets or so, it's not going to cause Maduro to do anything. In fact, you see that it's happened the opposite effect. It's hardening his position. He's used it to rally his people. If there was opposition to him, right now it's been silenced because they see that there's a risk that there could be a clash with Americans. And he has mobilized a lot of his reserves, and he's put his military at a lot of key installations, et cetera. And they have some ability. You may have seen, I think it was yesterday or day before, where Venezuelan F-16s buzzed some of our ships and actually had close flybys. So you see that one accident or one mistake could actually cause a clash that could go anywhere. Why are we trying to do this? If we're not trying to get regime change, and why would we pick that one country to say, hey, we're going to stop the cartels here. And where are we going with that? You also saw the Secretary of State sound more like the Secretary of War. We showed you on a couple of shows in the last couple of days where he's saying this is war. And the president is going to wage war to stop this drug cartel. We're also threatening to send troops into Mexico, special forces troops, to actually go against the cartel. And I'm going to just tell you, this is a bad idea the way we're going about it, because it doesn't do anything to this demand side in the United States. It leaves that totally unaddressed. And that's the number one problem. As long as you have a demand, there will be people using illegal means to satisfy that drug demand. So we're not even trying to do that. And you're going up to here. And it is so big and massive, the entire U.S. Armed Forces would not be able to stop it, and we aren't going to use them for that. So why try something that can't succeed? And then you're doing it with a fraction of the troops necessary. All that may end up doing is getting things spiraled out of control where you get in a war. I mean, I see no upside to any of this. I don't know where we're going. Nobody knows what the mission is, what the objective is, what the strategy is, what the resources are, how many troops are you going to send there, how long are you going to leave those troops, those 8 boats? I mean, is that now their permanent station, or are you going to have this rotation? I don't think they've even thought it through. So these ships are going to be out there for some period of time, and then you're going to have to rotate them back. And is someone going to replace them? Is this just a one-off? Nobody knows. They have not said anything publicly. And again, based on what we've done in so many other places here, not just in this administration, but even going back into the previous administration, we rarely seem to have an idea what we're trying to accomplish. We just do stuff. We just don't like something, so we want to throw some military at it or whatever. And now then you've changed the name for this president to the Department of War, and I'm concerned that you're actually more likely to use military power because you think it's easy. It's not hard at all, he said. That's something we're going to keep an eye on, and I promise you we'll hold the administration accountable. And like we always do, if they do something that makes sense, we'll be the first to congratulate them and applaud it. And if they're doing stuff that doesn't make sense and could be counterproductive for our country, we're going to call that out too, because we are unintimidated, uncompromised to bring you the truth. That's what we founded this channel on, and we're going to continue to do it. Thank you very much, folks. Appreciate your time on a Saturday. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.